We are going to talk about the development of the Public Safety Assessment, the research behind the PSA, and how it was created. The first step was proof of concept. The researchers conducted a thorough review of the existing literature regarding pretrial assessments and factors, which included examining a recent meta-analysis, a comprehensive review of existing pretrial assessment studies. They did this in order to identify what the research already revealed about the strongest predictors of pretrial failure. Remember, in the context of pretrial assessments, pretrial failure means failing to appear in court or being arrested for a new offense while on pretrial release. The next step for the researchers was to conduct a study in Kentucky in order to test what they learned from the meta-analysis. At the time, Kentucky used the Kentucky Pretrial Risk Assessment tool. This tool included both interview-dependent and non-interview-dependent risk factors. The researchers created a revised version of the tool, which excluded the interview-dependent factors. Using 150,000 cases from Kentucky, the researchers compared the results of the original tool with the results of the revised tool. From their review of the existing research and the results of the study, the researchers concluded two things. First, they concluded that criminal history factors are the strongest predictors of pretrial success and failure. So, things like prior convictions, prior failures to appear, and pending charges were the strongest predictors. Second, the researchers also concluded that including interview-dependent factors related to a person's community ties or stability did not improve a tool's predictive power. So things like mental health concerns, substance use, where the person lived, and whether the person was employed, information usually obtained by conducting an interview, did not add to pretrial prediction if criminal history factors are already known. The researchers found that the revised Kentucky tool, without those interview-dependent factors, was equally as predictive as the original tool. This initial research demonstrates that it was possible to create a predictive assessment that does not contain factors that depend on an interview. This is not to say that such factors are not predictive, but the research and studies showed that an assessment tool could be equally as predictive without the interview-dependent information. The next step was to assemble a set of data from a multitude of jurisdictions so that the researchers could create an assessment that was strongly predictive across a range of diverse jurisdictions. The researchers constructed the largest, most comprehensive multi-jurisdictional pretrial dataset ever. It drew on 1.5 million cases from approximately 300 cities, counties, and federal judicial districts from across the country. Data came from Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Kentucky, Maine, Ohio, and Virginia. The team received data from the entire federal pretrial system, spanning all 50 states, and they also received data from Washington, D.C. to examine which factors are most predictive of pretrial success or failure. What do you need? You need outcomes. You need to know whether the person succeeded or failed while on pretrial release. So the researchers cleaned the data to include only cases in which the person was released at some point during the pretrial process. If the person was never released, they couldn't test the predictability because there are no outcomes for that person. They stayed in jail. So, after cleaning the data to ensure it included only the people with outcomes and where the factors were known, the researchers had 750,000 cases for their development data set. Next, using this massive data set, the researchers examined relationships in the data. They looked for statistically significant relationships between predictive factors and pretrial outcomes. The researchers tested factors that drew on data from administrative databases, including demographics, current offense, other pending cases, prior convictions, and court appearances. The researchers also tested factors that depended on an interview, such as substance use, mental health, education, employment, and residential stability. They tested for the outcomes that are traditionally used in pretrial risk assessments. failure to appear pretrial, and new pretrial criminal arrest. They also tested for a pretrial outcome that was not typically measured: new violent pretrial criminal arrest. This type of pretrial misconduct, a violent crime, not just any crime, is the behavior that decision makers are most concerned about when making pretrial decisions. After all of this analysis, what did the researchers find? The researchers were able to isolate the factors that most effectively predicted the pretrial outcomes, and the results were consistent with prior research. None of the strongest predictors came from interview-dependent factors. The factors they isolated as being most predictive are related to a person's age, current charge, and all the criminal history, including failures to appear. All the data for these factors are drawn from administrative data sources. No interview is needed. The final step was to validate these results. Simply put, they tested if these results held true in other jurisdictions using a different set of data. So they tested this new tool, the PSA, on 500,000 new cases. The results showed that the 9 factors and the weighting of the factors were predictive for these new cases. I'm going to end with the factors themselves. These are the factors that the researchers identified as being the most predictive of the pretrial outcomes: age at current arrest, current violent offense, pending charge at the time of arrest, prior misdemeanor conviction, prior felony conviction, prior violent convictions, prior failure to appear pretrial in the past 2 years, prior failure to appear pretrial older than 2 years, and prior sentence to incarceration. In the next video, you can learn about how the assessment weighs each factor to predict the 3 outcomes and how we arrive at a scaled score of 1 to 6.